In terms of those proposals, Dr. Lancaster, I'm just reading from your submission. The first recommendation is consider legislative options for reforming the child support system, including a formula option whereby regular child support A would only be payable with respect to care provided by a parent or carer above a 50% level. B, payments would depend on the payer's income while being independent of the payee's income. And C, payments would rise with the income of the payer but at a low or zero incremental rate once income passes an average level. So coming back to the first point, would only be payable with respect to care provided by a parent or carer above a 50% level. So you in effect saying that there's a presumption, or there should be a presumption, that 50% of the care for the child is with each parent, and only when one parent goes above that a payment should be made. Is that what you're essentially getting at?
Yes, that's correct. At the moment, the system in Australia is that we've got an income shares method, and so what you're assuming that the parents essentially act like an intact couple, and so they share the resources. So one parent may be paying 100% of the costs of the children. This approach is starting from a position that parents have equal care and there's no child support paid, but then if one parent provides less than 50% care, the cost savings that they make from that are transferred to the other parent.
And I'm thinking of the objection that might be made to that. I'm thinking of the previous witnesses, for example, and I'm guessing, I suppose, as to what the objection might be. But could it be that in the case of the custodial parent, whose opportunity to work is lost, or in part lost, by the fact that that person is caring for the child, that the 50% proposal would be unfair to that party? How would you respond to that? I think that would be the kind of objection I could imagine.
Well, this is all principle that we're talking about. What it comes down to is a formula at the end of the day. And I guess what I'm proposing is a fairly standard formula, like the UK uses it. And so you only look at the income of the paying parent. If care's 50-50, there's no child support paid. And then you look at the income of the paying parent, and as their income goes up, they pay an increasing amount, and then it sort of tops out. So that's how it would work in practice. The point of this, I think the reason why this type of formula isn't used is that it seems too arbitrary, because you essentially make up rates. You say, you take this percentage of the parent's income, and I think that's why it's kind of fallen out of favour, even though it's actually a more sensible formula to have. For example, in the United States, nearly all the states now use an income shares formula. But if you look at that formula in mathematical terms or in terms of outcomes, it doesn't actually perform well. But it's just got a nice theory behind it, because you can say we're trying to make it like the family we're all together and how they share each other's income. It kind of sounds nice. I think that's why that model is so popular. But just a simple model where you take a percentage of the paying parent's income is falling out of favour with policymakers for whatever reason. But I think it's because of a lack of a story. And so I guess I'm putting a story on it so that it's got a principled approach to it.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, you can put whatever parameters on it you like. You can make it extremely generous or not generous, depending on what numbers you use.
And so just thinking through how this would work in a sort of hypothetical example, let's assume that that the carer is caring for the child 75% of the time. So under this proposal, the payer would be responsible for 25% of the time that he or she's not caring for the child, or the other person is caring for the child, and then you say payments would depend on the payer's income, so it would be a percentage of income for that 25%. Do I understand that correctly?
Yep, that's correct. So essentially what you do, you'd work out what the payer would spend if they had 50% care, if no child support involved. If they just had 50% care, what they would pay. Given they've only got 25% care, then it's half of that amount. And so effectively they pay half in cash to the other parent, and they provide the other part of their care in the form of direct care.
So would that be based on a cost of children calculation as to what that care would be? So how do you get to your
the cost of
base
children
level? Yes, the cost of children.
So what I propose is just using a median or average income of single parents and then what they spend. The quite strange thing about the current system in Australia is that they actually just look at intact families. So all the cost data includes every parent except for parents that are separated. So it's quite bizarre. It's all for families. But in this case, you'd look at a single parent and their income and what they would spend. And you fix it to, say, an average, and you use that as the base, and then you just calculate percentages. So you wouldn't have lots of cost tables. You just have a single figure.
Sure.
And if your income's zero, you pay zero. It's half of the average, you pay half. And so it works out to an extremely simple formula. It's something you can actually look at. Like the UK uses this type of formula. It doesn't quite have the same principles behind it, but you can just punch in some numbers and very quickly you get the child support assessment.
Can I ask you if it's possible on notice for you to give us a couple of scenarios so we can actually see the figures and how it works out? I'm trying to understand.
Yep.
As we're discussing it, but I think it would be useful if I had an actual couple of case studies to say, this is the income, this is what would happen if it was a 60-40 situation versus an 80-20 situation, or what, and how the figures would work out. I think that would help us.
Yes, that's no problem. We've actually built this alternative formula into our calculator at Child Support Australia. We've actually got the most popular non-government calculators for working out child support, and every time someone works out their child support, we actually put down the bottom the alternative figure, and so I'm happy to do that.
That would be useful, I think, to the committee to understand your proposal in terms of what the practical outcome would be. So I don't think I need to ask more questions about it, because I think that would provide the answer for me and other committee members in a way in which we could see. In
concrete
terms,
terms,
in terms of the figures, what it means. And I was just wondering whether I had another question or not. Look, I'll go to Senator Hanson while I read your notes a bit further.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Lancaster, basically what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're putting the financial responsibility of that child or children onto both parents. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yep, that's correct.
So it's both their responsibility. They both brought the children into the world, regardless of a separation. You have to take responsibility, regardless of how much care you have of that child. Because if you're a married couple, even if you're there home together, or the husband's out working, the wife's working, whoever looks after the child, it is no different than if you are separated in a situation that they have to look after the child, unless once they get of school age, then it becomes a lot easier because they're at school during the day and childcare is provided for them, most of the times picked up by the taxpayer anyway. So it's financial responsibility. When it's, the big problem that we hear with childcare is a lot of people, non-custodial parents, are actually paying childcare. They don't get to see the children, they have little access to the children, and not only that, if they're on 190,000, which is the capped, so on 2 children they're paying at least 40,000, 3 plus children 50,000 a year. What they're saying is, what we've heard in evidence is that this money goes in the hands of the custodial parent. They don't know if it's spent on the children. We hear a lot about possibly it could be spent on Botox or new shoes or holidays or buying a new car, and it's not necessarily going to the child. Have you ever thought about maybe that money's been put into an account for the children and then it can be accessed by both parents, right, on specific items, whether it be education, sporting, anything that relates directly to those children. So it basically works on your cashless debit card that we have in the system now already. So it's actually controlled. You can only spend it in certain areas, and then it's actually can be viewed by both parents, and it's actually made sure that it's there for the children's. Have you ever thought about anything like that?
Yes, I have thought about it. It's been proposed by quite a lot of people. There isn't an element of that in the current system with respect to things like major medical expenses, dental fees, private school fees.
Yeah.
Things like that, they tend to be separated from child support, or a parent gets credit for those things. The issue, I guess, is partly it will be complex to administer something like that, as well as you can't capture all the costs of raising your children in those terms. The economic studies kind of show that a lot of the costs are things like adding an extra bedroom to a house, or or paying for extra on holidays, or how you furnish your home. Like it's kind of hard to capture exactly what's spent on a child. Like, economists have got a way of doing it, but it doesn't come down to simple expense items that you can really capture.
At least it would be a starting point to know that that money is going directly to the child. All right, then with the child support, what do you feel about the way the system is at the moment? And you spoke about the formula. Should child support be based on what it costs to rear a child? And it should go in age brackets, because a child up to 1 to 6 is a lot cheaper than, say, from 7 to 12 and 13 to 18, so the 3 brackets. But if you actually did it on the cost of rearing that child, conservative. You don't need to say, we're going to put in private schools here and we're going to do this. That's out of the question. Basic cost of rearing a child, of what it costs. Now, that parent has to have a roof over their head. They've got to find their own roof. So we're not taking the cost of what it is to structure of a house for a single parent. Admittedly, they need an extra room for that child. It's taken into consideration. So then, what I'm saying then, why are we tying it to parental income when we should basically look at the cost of that rearing that child should be borne by both parents who brought that child into the world? So why are we tying it to even their ability to earn, regardless of the factors whether they're earning the money, their ability to earn that money?
Yeah, well, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head with it. Of the problem with the current system. It's all based on income. So if you get your income below the self-support threshold, suddenly you don't have to pay anything. You have to contribute anything. The other parent might have to pay 100% of the costs of the child. And so it's all income. It's about income sharing at the moment. There's no anchoring into real costs. The formula that we've proposed, it's got more of that anchor there, because you've got a benchmark level. You say that what the average payer would spend, and you've got that point, and then you level off payments for higher income earners, and for lower income earners you're trying to get up to that point quickly, and so there's no relief if you drop below a certain income level. There's always a problem. You've got lower income earners, you can't force them to pay a fixed amount, like a general kind of level of cost.
See, a lot of the argument is that that child has the right to live in that lifestyle they would have had if the parents were still together. But that's not the fact, okay? That's hypothetic. And the circumstances may have changed, but that's the decision of parents to split and go their own ways. So, but in my dealing with a lot of parents, if they are in a financial position, they will gladly pay for that education. They will gladly buy them those extra pair of shoes. They will gladly, do whatever they can for the child because they love their child. They will spend that money on their child. So,
in effect, under the current formula, the payer is considered to be living as part of a family, in a dual income household, and it hasn't borne all the costs of divorce and everything else. And so the amounts they're asked to pay are out of proportion with what they can actually afford. And the problem is that people also want to get on with their lives. And if it's one thing to be part of a close-knit family where you're living through your children, you're spending everything on your kids. But when you're starting a new life, you might have a new partner, other kids involved. You can't spend the same way as what you would if you're all together under the same roof. And so the current formula, the current model, I think, is just wrong-headed from the start to try and reanimate an intact family when that's not the case at all.
what is your opinion if you have a couple that splits? One is the custodial parent, one's the non-custodial parent. The custodial parent remarries, has more children, doesn't work anymore. Why should that affect the non-custodial parent in their payments?
It shouldn't. And that's why we've proposed a formula where the income of the custodial parent wouldn't have any bearing on payments. It doesn't make sense to have the custodial parent's income as part of the formula because it's a terrible measure of their economic circumstances. As you pointed out, they can remarry someone wealthy. That gives them the opportunity not to work. And then so their income enters the formula as, they're in need of more money, when in fact that's not the case. It's actually it's a really poor measure of economic circumstances because most parents do repartner following divorce. And so you've got two new households that are quite different.
What do you think under the circumstances? Okay, you have a couple that separate. You have the cost of what it costs to rear that child or two children, three, whatever you got. You work basically on the formula, what you're saying. That amount of money is set. Okay? We set that. That's at time of separation. That's the circumstances at the time. So you set that. Then what you do is that both parties can get on with their life. It's still set at that amount of money for those children, and it's just indexed with CPI, a cost increase to that. Now, if they want to go on and get an extra job, work second part-time, get married again, income in the households, that's additional. But if they don't pay their money or throw in their job, that is a cost to them, and that can be taken out of their assets, or it's a cost against them for the rest of their lives. How does that?
Well, that's essentially what happens in quite a few US states because they go through a court system. So once the child support order is made, it's kind of fixed unless they want to go back to court. You can also achieve that through a binding agreement between parents, and it's something that we recommend parents do because once you've locked in an amount, then you're free to actually go about, to run your life how you want. I guess the issue is if the amount's too high and then you become unemployed or something, that could cause problems, but you could even have provisions for that. Something the government could do, I guess, is help people come to these agreements themselves. At the moment, to get a binding child support agreement, you have to go and see a lawyer and get it sort of all signed off, which parents might be reluctant to do. If there was a standard way of coming up with an agreement between parents where the amounts are fixed, then that could actually help a lot. Because the problem at the moment is that when incomes go up and down, the assessment changes. So there's a constant incentive to try and get your income down because that'll affect your assessment in the next year.
Should child support be based on the tied to financials and how often you have the children? If we got rid of the times, how many times, based on how much you've got the child and how much you pay, do you believe that there would be more of a agreement between parents of allowing them more access to the children and that caring by each party?
Yeah, well, to get more agreement, I guess our approach is that you take away some of the profit making out of child support because the fact is that parents on lower incomes don't spend much on their kids, but at the moment the formula assumes that they're spending a great deal and therefore, they need all this money.
But it shows that they don't.
Yeah, that's right. And so I guess our approach is just to moderate the amount of child support payments happening, like don't have these excessive amounts, and then you take away the incentive for parents to try and dominate care, and that reduces the court appearances and all the rest. And it gets parents, I guess, sharing their care more evenly.
So if we did away with how much care you're having and just come back to the basics of how much it costs to rear those childs, split between the two parties, get on with your life, and if you want to move forward, fair enough. But you are responsible for paying that money for the care of the child.
Yeah, I guess if we move away from being so sensitive to income, because that's the real problem.
All right.
I will say, I guess something that hasn't come up is that when you drop the custodial parent's income out of the system, then suddenly they've got an incentive to work. And so you could get, that helps children enormously, because then the custodial parents are much more likely to earn an income themselves rather than just relying on child support.
I heard that a lot of parents are thrown in their jobs, they won't work, they won't do the overtime extras because it's all going in child support, and they're unable to live themselves. Thank you.
But you were saying for the other parent though, weren't you, and what I just heard you say, that if you exclude the payee's income, then that person's got an incentive to work.
That's right.
Can you just elucidate that a bit more?
At the moment under the current formula it's based on both parents' incomes, and so if the payee increases their income, they get less child support. And the thing is that it doesn't really, there's no real point in having the payee income in there in the first place. It doesn't really help the calculations, but it deters people from working.
Right.
So if child support's just based on the payeur's income, then the payee, what they do doesn't affect child support. It kind of halves admin costs, because you're not worrying about the recipients, what they're doing anymore. It doesn't matter. They can do what they want.
Maybe the examples you will provide us will help me understand it better. But
Chair, can I just ask a question there? Just
Chair, could I
based on
ask
that
a
premise,
question on this one?
just so
Mr. Young and then Ms. Stegel.
So just a question on that theory you had there. So in a scenario where the non-custodial parent earns $100,000 a year, and the custodial parent earns $150,000 a year, the non-custodial parent would still pay.
Correct, yeah, based on them having, providing less than their fair share of care directly.
That pay when
Okay,
they
so the
were
person earning
providing
more would
less than
actually still get
50% of the
paid.
care.
Yeah, and they still pay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you don't penalise the custodial parent for earning an income. You just let them earn their income. And they.
Okay.
And the fact is that higher income custodial parents spend more on children anyway, so they probably deserve some compensation for that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Stegel?
So my question was just in understanding this proposal, sorry, just take off speaker. How then do you account for the payer? Normally a non-custodial parent, without the majority of care, but not automatically. But anyway, someone who's assessed as being the payer of child support, who that willingly reduce their earning capacity or change careers or study, or significantly impact their income. How do you then take that into account? Because at the end of the day, if people are willingly changing their earning capacity, you can't get money out of a stone, and we then get into a very dysfunctional system of it's very adversarial, and then you have garnishee orders, and it really escalates the level of acrimony. How do you propose to change or deal with non-primary carers taking steps to minimise their child support liability or responsibility by reducing their earning capacity?
Well, we're not proposing any changes in that area. There's a provision there at the moment that if you can make an appeal against an assessment if you believe that the payer, or if any parent has reduced their income deliberately, and then child support can make a determination to keep their income at its former level for a period of time. So there's a provision there already. The formula that we're proposing would, I guess, lessen the incentives for that kind of thing to happen, because it's a bit less adversarial in terms of people's income. But we're not proposing any changes to the current provision.
Well, there's a substantial amount of evidence as well in the difficulty of tax returns coming in sort of maybe belatedly, and then adjustments being made to previous years' earning, and then if there is a challenge or a reassessment sought, part of some of the evidence we've heard has been people being incredibly upset that their assessments have retrospectively been sort of increased, and then there is a child support liability where there wasn't one before, and it gets garnished from wages, and that really impacts people's ability to meet their living costs. It is a part of the equation that also needs to be looked at, is that assessment. How do you properly assess the payer's ability to meet the child support responsibility, whether it's in the positive sense or the negative sense of what they're doing with their earning capacity?
Well, we do have a proposal in that area, because we hear complaints often that payers haven't submitted tax returns for years, or they're doing something dodgy with, they're earning cash income and they're not declaring it, and various issues where they're still using a really old tax return to work out child support. And what you can simply do is, in those situations, to use a default income level so that the payer pays a reasonable amount until such time as they start declaring their income properly or submit a tax return. So that's a proposal we've got, which is fairly simple. You just have a default income that you can apply in certain situations where parents are hiding income. The other case, I think, where income comes in higher and then they get a liability, I think the onus probably there is on the parent to handle that themselves. If they're reporting that they've got a low income and it turns out they've got more, then that's kind of their problem.
So would that default income be, say, the median income, or?
Yeah, it's exactly what would suggest.
But does that help? The person likely to be hiding an income is probably somebody who's earning more than the median income.
Yeah.
So I suppose what you're saying is that if it's based on the median income, at least they're paying something, and hopefully in due course the ATO will find out what their real income was and it can be adjusted subsequently. Yeah,
that's exactly right. For some parents, some receiving parents, the other parent hasn't put in a tax return for 10 years. And at the moment, there's nothing that's done about it. But all you have to do is say, okay, you're paying the default amount until you put your tax returns in.
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions, Mr. Stegall?
No, thank you.
Dr. Lancaster, I think we've exhausted our questions. None of the others, my colleagues online, have indicated they want to ask any questions. So thank you for your submission and thank you for discussing with us. And if you can provide some examples of just how your formula would work, and in comparison to how the system currently works, that would help us in terms of considering it. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.